Do a good
Waiting
job
to
in your
watch commercials is the best ever.
Okay, it's 7:30 PM. We're going to start this regular meeting of the Rutherford Board of Education, February 22nd, 2021. I'm going to ask everyone to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, Mr. Kelly, if you could take roll.
Mrs. Ahmed,
Here.
Mr. Bogosian,
Here.
Mr. Conti,
Here.
Mr. Healy,
Here.
Mrs. Jones,
Present.
Mr. Mazzone,
Here.
Dr. Racine,
Here.
Mr. Sprayberry,
Here.
Dr. Olati.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay, the New Jersey Open Public Meetings Act was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of and to attend the meeting of public bodies at which any business affecting their interests is discussed or acted upon. In accordance with the provisions of the Act, the Rutherford Board of Education has caused notice of this meeting to be published by having the date, time, and place posted on the bulletin board outside the Borough Clerk's office, mailed to the Herald, South Bergenite, and the Record newspapers, and filed with the Borough Clerk. Hard copies of the agenda are available in the meeting room, and the agenda is posted electronically on Friday before the meeting date on the district's website at www.rutherfordschools.org. This regular meeting of the Rutherford Board of Education will be held as scheduled in the cafeteria at Rutherford High School. In accordance with the various governor's executive orders limiting participation in indoor gatherings, this meeting will also be conducted utilizing video conferencing as allowed by the Open Public Meetings Act, NJSA 10:4-6, as amended by PL 2020 C11. As only a limited number of members of the public will be able to attend the meeting in person, members of the public are encouraged to participate by logging on to the following website at 7:30 PM as listed in the agenda. All meetings of the public participating remotely will be muted throughout the meeting, although opportunities for public comment will be made available to those participating remotely, as well as to those attending the meeting in person during the public comment portions of the meeting, at which times they will be unmuted. A video recording of the video conference meeting will be made available on the district's website, www.rutherfordschools.org, subsequent to the meeting. The video link can be found by opening the Board of Education link and clicking on Public Meetings and then Videos. Okay, so in your board packets, you should have two sets of meeting minutes to approve. One is the regular meeting from January 25th, 2021, as well as the executive session, January 25th, 2021. Anyone have any comments? Hearing none, I'll ask Mr. Kelly to please enter those. And our student representative is not here this evening, and so we are going to move on to special presentation of our annual report of the district audit. Turn it over to Mr. Kelly and Mr. Marone.
Yeah, I'm trying to get them up on the screen. It doesn't seem to be working, so.
Well, you don't want to scare me. Are we good to go?
Yeah, I'll keep playing.
We can hear you well, Bob.
Okay,
Well, yeah, everybody can hear you, but just
great.
can't see you.
Well, when you get my screen back on, my hair's a little bit longer, but okay. So good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to be virtually with all of you tonight. Just to give you a little background, due to the ongoing pandemic, the state legislature approved an extension to file the fiscal year 2020 audits to February 5th, 2021. Your report was submitted timely, and all information was uploaded to the New Jersey Department of Education within the timelines. The delay in filing school district audit deadlines for the last two previous years was mainly due to the delay in pension information that the state of New Jersey is required to provide all New Jersey governmental entities, including the school district. So here's hoping that for the fiscal year 21 report, we can return back to the original filing deadline of December 5th. But over the last couple of years, the state has not been able to allow us to meet that deadline. Just a few brief comments regarding the audit that you have received. You have two documents. One is the comprehensive annual financial report that's called the CAPR, that's the large document. And then there's a smaller document called the Auditor's Management Report. The CAPR is more than just the audit report. It includes, in addition to our opinion, there's some discussion and analysis by management of the financial highlights, as well as statistical data and any findings and recommendations. There's also a single audit section in the CAPR with respect to the audit of federal and state grants for aids that are received by the school. Even though the district's report is in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, which we call GAAP, the report includes a budgetary comparison, Schedule Exhibit C1, that compares actual revenue and expenditures for the fiscal year 2020 with the original and final budget for that year. In this schedule, budgetary fund balance is also reflected, including restricted and unrestricted fund balance. Unrestricted fund balance is limited to 2% of the fiscal year 20 general fund expenditures with some exceptions. So your main focus, and as you're discussing your budget, I believe later on as well, is on the budgetary basis, but our report has to be in accordance with GAAP. So it has several more exhibits and schedules and some footnotes that are there for the purposes of GAAP. But I was just really concentrating on the C1, which follows your budget and follows the type of way you're going about your budget for this year. So the district generated about $532,000 of excess surplus, which was a little bit less than the previous year's excess surplus by about $62,000. The unassigned or unrestricted surplus was 1.4, almost 1.5 million, which was a slight reduction from the previous year's unassigned fund balance of about 1.5 million, so roughly about $27,000. And your capital reserve restriction increased by 1.4 million from the previous year. That information is reflected in footnote 3 of the CAPR. Lastly, we unfortunately had one finding and recommendation relating to the financial records maintained for the Community Education Enterprise Fund, for which a corrective action plan is to be acted upon this evening. As I have discussed with Mr. Kelly and Mr. Hurley, the financial reporting for the Community Ed program falls under the auspices of the board. Therefore, the record keeping and monthly activities required to follow board guidelines. Overall, this enterprise fund is not reflective of the school district's finances as a whole. But unfortunately, since it is in the report, it has to adhere to the guidelines. So the Finance Committee has met with representatives of the Community Education program, and I've been on two of those calls as well. And in my capacity, I'm also continuing to provide assistance as requested to help mitigate this finding and eliminate it so that you don't have another repeat finding in the next fiscal year. So that's a pretty quick capsule of some financial highlights as well as the findings. And I'll entertain any questions that anybody may have.
So first, I just wanted to thank Mr. Marone for his presentation, both tonight and also with the Finance Committee. Finance Committee members are privy to all the information and committee work extensively around this audit. Do any other board members have questions for Mr. Marone? Nope, okay. Hearing none, I want to thank Mr. Marone again for all of your great work, and also want to congratulate Mr. Kelly and Mr. Hurley on an overall very solid audit this year.
Thank you.
Again, thank you for allowing me to zoom in tonight. I appreciate it.
And if I could, Ms. Marone, thank you also for the extra duty this year, meeting with the committee members and meeting with members of the community school and with some other board members and Mr. Kelly and I to correct this problem that's been ongoing for a few years. And I think we're in a good place right now. I think we've made some real progress. So I thank you for your involvement in that. And I want to echo what Dr. Alati said, and to Mr. Kelly and his staff, and also to the administrators and the supervisors who submit and manage budgets throughout the district, that every year, aside from this hiccup that really isn't under our control, we've been clean, and that's a remarkable achievement. This year, especially although this audit covers the budget, in reality, we've doubled the budget with the referendum project, which means doubling the work and doubling the accounting and doubling the state part. So I want to commend all those people involved. I appreciate being thanked along with them, but I'm a real minor player in this budgetary process. So I want to congratulate Joe and the principals and the supervisors and everybody and his staff, Joe's staff, for all the work they do to make sure we're on top of everything and handling it the right way all year. So congratulations to everyone. And of course, the board and the finance committee for your support, your involvement, and your engagement with us in this process.
All right, so we're going to move on now to budget presentation by Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Bob. Okay, give me a second here, please.
You didn't need me any further?
No, we're done.
Yeah, thanks, Bob.
See you next year.
Thank you.
Yeah, although there's no B. Mr. Kelly, I think we could probably stay here, even though you're projecting it, right? Because we don't have an audience.
Yeah, I think so.
Everybody has a copy of a PowerPoint that you can follow along as well.
I'll stand up, though. Okay. So this is preliminary budget for 2021-22. As we do every year, we discuss. Oh, we can't, we do. Okay, let's do it this way. Yeah.
I won't make any more suggestions.
Yeah, thank you. Technology, huh? Okay, as we do every year, we consider what our objectives are for the upcoming year. Here, for next year, 21-22, they were pretty standard with one big glaring exception. We want to build upon our current program offerings. Everything we've added into the budget over the prior years, we want to be able to continue with that, assuming it's still relevant and is something we need. So that's always a priority. We also want to provide for facilities improvements and maintenance and repair. We do have the referendum work going on, of course, but there's still a lot of things that need to get done that are not covered by that work. So as Mr. Marone was just talking about the capital reserve, we use a piece of that every year to get some more work done. So, part of the budget process is analyzing that and figuring out what we really need and prioritizing that. We review our staffing needs. Those change every year for one reason or another. We'll get into that a little bit more later. And lastly, we need to address issues related to COVID-19. That's a new one this year. When we stood here a year ago, this really wasn't on anybody's radar. It was very a little mumbling in the background, but it was not something we were focused on. So that's something we need to consider in this process as well. I'll go through this quickly because we do this every year, but we basically have four sources of funds here in preparing the budget. Local tax levy, state aid, federal aid, and miscellaneous stuff. Local tax levy is the largest part of our budget. It's over 90% of the budget. Our base for this year is $43.3 million. State regulations mandate that we increase that by no more than 2%, plus some allowable adjustments. In this case, for next year, the state hasn't released the calculations for the allowable adjustments, so I don't know if they're going to be relevant to us. My sense is they will not. So we're looking at a 2% increase on the base, which is our 2% cap, obviously. So our base would be $44.2 million. So that's what we're putting forward. History of state aid. State aid numbers are not out yet. The last I heard, the governor would do his annual budget address tomorrow. And by law, they have to release state aid numbers to the school districts within 48 hours after that, so I'm expecting the numbers on Thursday. I haven't heard any mumbling as to what could be in there, increase, decrease, flat, whatever, I don't know. But we'll find out later this week. So I put this together today. And normally we had a chart just listing state aid over the last 20 years, which wasn't really doing it. This one I think might be a little more helpful. What it's doing here is showing the orange bars are our annual budget. That's our general operating budget for the last 19 or 20 years. And you see it's a pretty steady climb. I mean, that's realistic, and that's what we really hope to see. So that's our general operating budget every year, and it's going from oldest to newest. So the bar on the far right obviously is for this current year. It's not for the budget because I just don't have that information yet. The blue bars at the very bottom are the state aid for each of those years. You see it's minuscule compared to what the local taxpayers are contributing, and it's not growing at the same rate as the rest of the budget. So the state, which does have a mandate to fund any of their initiatives, anything that they're forcing the schools to do by law, they're supposed to fund that. It doesn't often happen. And you can see, the blue lines are fairly consistent year after year over the last 20 years. There are some blips here and there. You go back to where it says year 9, there's a decrease. If you remember, that's when Governor Christie came into office, and the first thing he did was slash aid. So that's what you're seeing there. That squiggly line in the middle is the state aid percentage of the budget. So you see, going back to 20 years ago, and I'm looking at the percentages on the right-hand side of the screen, we were at 10%. So the state was funding 10% of our budget. Now they're down to under 6%. And again, there was a year 9 there when Governor Christie came in. There was a further drop, but it's kind of held steady for the last 8 or 10 years at that, roughly that 6%. So it just gives you a little background on what we can expect from the state. Miscellaneous sources, we have excess surplus. Mr. Marone just talked about that. That's extra money, money that was unspent, surplus from the 1920 audit. By law, we have to build that into the 21-22 budget, so that's what we're doing. As he mentioned, it's $532,000. Last year was $584,000. That is deliberate. I do try and manage that number down every year, but that's just something I do. Tuition revenue and savings, I still have to look at this. We'll see a big decrease in tuition revenue because last year we had the summer programs. We had what else do we have? Well, we had the Bulldog Care, which was still in place, but it hasn't performed the way we'd hoped to because of the coronavirus. We do expect it to come back. So tuition revenue I expect to come down, but related costs would also come down. So I don't see a major budget impact on that. Capital reserve, as he had indicated, Mr. Marone, we have about $3 million in there right now, which is great. That is fantastic. We are proposing to use about $880,000 in the next year's budget, and we'll have some details on that coming up.
Joe?
Yes.
The excess surplus, that's OpEx spending, and that can't be capitalized. We can't capitalize that?
No. By law, it has to go back into the next budget cycle after it's measured and determined. Okay, the uses of funds. Yeah, every year we have, different challenges and assumptions, or the same challenges and assumptions, but of course, the COVID-related expenses is a big one this year. Fortunately, we have some good news to report on that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Health benefit premiums, as we've discussed, the state health benefits plan has really upended the whole program this year, so we're still looking to see how that plays out and how that impacts us. My gut is that it will result in a minor cost savings, but we'll see how it all works out. Out of district placements, we'll get into that in a second, but we do have an obligation for students who need specialized services. If we can't provide them, we have an obligation to get them to a school that can provide those services. Extraordinary services, that's related. That's, physical therapy and occupational therapy. But those numbers, those last two numbers, the tuition and the extraordinary services, do tend to go up every year, although we have some good news on that one too. Facilities maintenance, we'll get into that. We talked about that already briefly, but we'll get into that a little bit more. So those are the main issues, not to mention salaries, of course. Salaries at this point are fairly easy to calculate because we're still in the REA contract, the 3-year REA contract, so we know what those numbers are. We just have to look at staffing and other relatively minor changes. Good news is the ESSER 2 grant funding was announced just on Friday, I think.
Yep.
There's a federal grant program that, as you'll see, is intended to carry us through September 30th of 2023, so over the next 2.5 years. So our allocation is $675,000, and we can use it for all sorts of things, and it's really a wide-ranging, open-ended list of possibilities here. But, professional development for teachers, cleaning and sanitizing supplies, educational technology, especially as it pertains to getting kids who are home into the swing of the education, mental health services for children who are struggling with all these changes, summer and after school programs, facilities improvements to reduce risk of virus transmission, et cetera. It's quite an extensive list, and as I indicated, it's very open-ended. So Mr. Hurley and I spoke about putting together a committee of staff to evaluate and see how we can best spend this money. That's a giant pot of money, and we want to obviously put it to the best use possible.
If I can
Please.
interject, not knowing this was coming out on Friday, but on Friday I put together a memo to go out to the supervisors and the administrators looking ahead to next year. And what I've asked the supervisors to develop is a kind of a blueprint of where they see needs in terms of academic, social, emotional, behavioral support programs for students. Everybody's talking about gaps, but we haven't yet figured out, and when I say we haven't figured out, the state hasn't figured out how we're going to measure for those gaps, right? So some of that's got to be figured out too. So I asked for a plan by the first week of April, because as you know, in our school calendar, we have a professional development day the Tuesday after Memorial Day. And I want that day to be devoted towards looking ahead to next year. Now, there are many, many challenges with that, right? We don't know yet what next year is going to look like, right? We're guessing, hoping, thinking, but we don't know. We don't have answers to a lot of the concerns about behavioral issues, social issues, emotional issues, academic. There's a lot of little things that aren't going to get the headline on page 1, but you have a student who may have been home last March, chose to stay home this year, coming back to school. Maybe if we're back, let's say everybody's back in September, back full time, right? And again, for anybody who's listening, I said, let's say that's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen yet. That student hasn't been in school for 1.5 years, year and a third. That could be a third grader. That's a major part of his life. So the kid may not register on some measurement of having a social or emotional problem, but it's almost like going back to kindergarten or preschool, right? Getting started. So we're going to spend time, around, we have to start looking forward. We have to stop looking at every day and looking back, and, we have to start looking to when things are normal again. And, I put this together on Friday, knowing that a grant was coming out sometime, and now lo and behold, here it is. So some of the things, whatever they may be, that come out of this planning process, right? The problem is we come up with a lot of plans, but how are we funding them, right? So now we got some money that we could look at, and we can see where we're going to allocate it. So to Mr. Kelly's point, we're going to, from this discussion in April to develop planning, we could then take people from that group, form a little committee to start looking into the grant. And, with grant money, it's always in the details, right? So, it just came out. We have to find out more and more about how this money is going to be allocated and for what. But certainly, it's a nice, allotment for us to work off of, to look forward. And, the PPE won't be going away anytime soon. So some of the funding, we talked earlier, Joe mentioned, Mr. Kelly mentioned in the budget, a line item we didn't have to think about before. There could be some help there. So we're certainly grateful for the good news that we're getting some funding to help with some of these challenges.
In addition to the $675,000, is my understanding that there are additional amounts, one for learning acceleration. That's a learning acceleration allocation. I'm not really sure what this means. Like I said, this was just announced on Friday. There's a lot more to come as to the specifics, how these things can be spent, how we can record them, how we can report them. So there's more to come. But it was my understanding in reading that these two amounts at the bottom are in addition to the 675. They may come back at some point and say, no, they're not. That's part of the 675. But it's my understanding right now that it's not. And also mental health supports and services, $45,000. It looks like every district in the state got $45,000. So again, we need to see the details on that. But that's that's what's landed on our desk right now.
One last comment before we move on this. I'm grateful too that, the money must be obligated by 2023. Because sometimes, this money comes out and you have to use it or lose it very quickly.
Yes.
And this will allow, I think, a more thoughtful and a measured approach, where we're just not going to say, hey, there's money here, let's figure out how to spend it, right? So we can see, based on analysis and planning, what it looks like we need for September, and know that as things develop, maybe we guess right, maybe we guess wrong. We need more help. There'll be some funding left for that. So I'm pleased with that too, because Mr. Kelly can tell you better than I. Sometimes you hear about the funding, and you got to develop a plan and have it all spent and committed within sometimes a few months.
Yeah.
And that's not the best way to deal with things. So this is a good step, in the right direction for going forward.
Okay, so we'll be looking in that in the coming days, as Mr. Hurley mentioned. Getting back to out-of-district placements, as I said before, if we have students that we are unable to service because they have specialized needs, then we have an obligation, a legal obligation or moral obligation, to get them that education in a different school or find it somewhere else. We typically go, reach out to the South Bergen Jointure Commission first. That's a public school district, just like we are, so they generally provide services much cheaper than a private school does. So we look to them first, but we go to other public school districts, and ultimately, if we have to, we send the kids out to a private school for students with disabilities. Whatever it takes, but obviously we are looking to save money where we can. Out-of-district placements for the coming year. Again, we have another almost 20-year review here. The blue lines are total tuition costs for the year. The red line is the number of students who are placed out of district year after year. So you see the red line, 20 years ago, we had about 50 kids who were placing out of district. Now we're at about 75, and that's been fairly consistent over the last few years. I think the most important thing to take away from here is that the tuition dollars have increased substantially in the last 20 years, which translates to an increased tuition per student too. So it's not just the dollars, but it's on an individual basis. Tuition costs have skyrocketed. So you'll see that here.
And before you move, Mr. Kelly, on that slide, 2015-16, you can see the peak there for
Yep.
both students and expenditures. And to Mr. Kelly's point, tuitions were lower back then than they are now. And that's when we made a change in leadership. And that's when we made a change in mission and created programs to keep kids in district who should have been in district for a long time. And you could see all you have to do is visit the classrooms to see the impact, the positive impact on the students. But you look at this chart, you can see the positive impact on the budget as well. And, when you're looking at $250,000 or $500,000 in tuition that's staying in district, that's another reason we're able to do some of the amazing things. And they are amazing things that we have done in our programs with a 2% cap. So it has made a real significant change, I think, in the students, in their education, in their experience, but also in the budget. And I'm happy that that's had that impact.
For next year, personnel needs, we reached out to the administrators, to the supervisors to see what they need. We do have a number of retirements, people at the top of the guide, and they can be replaced with people lower in the guide. That's what we call breakage. That's a positive, a net positive for the budget. So we're factoring that in. We do need a guidance counselor at the middle school, Union Middle School, and that's based on the caseload. We're looking for 2 full-time teachers at Lincoln or Washington, probably more at Lincoln. This really utilizes the 2 brand-new classrooms, so that's what that's for. We need a special ed teacher at Pierpont. They're hoping for 2, but we've got them down for 1. We need a English language arts / special education teacher at the high school. And we're bumping up a PE teacher at the kindergarten center by a quarter of an FTE. Just to provide more PE services for the students there. Teacher assistants, that's another ball of wax altogether. That changes constantly throughout the year, but we are keeping an eye on it, and we know what we need for next year at this point, but we do expect changes on that periodically throughout the year. Okay?
Yeah, I think there's one, and I apologize for this, the ELA special ed at the high school. We're good with that. That's,
Oh, we are?
yeah, we don't need that.
Oh, okay, I apologize.
But I do want to add one thing. One of the things that we're still rather embryonic on this, in terms of developing, we're also, working with the administrators to look at current staffing in buildings. So where these are positions we need, it's possible that in 1 or 2 cases, there may not be a need somewhere else. So a teacher then would be transferred, or a position could be moved, so it doesn't become a budget line. If you follow what I'm saying, right? So teacher X might be at this school, and next year that position is needed, okay? One of the reasons why you see increases in special ed teachers too has to, again, go with co-teaching. So if there's a larger number of students who need a co-teacher in grade 3, for example, and they move up, and now there's an additional teacher need at Pierpont. So sometimes that teacher can move with the students, but sometimes there's a group coming in behind as well. So it's a fluid situation, but what we're showing as staffing needs now, it could change a little bit as we look at, what needs are in other buildings before the budget's finalized. Okay?
Mr. Hurley, just one question back to the PE teacher. Is that a half-time? I know it was a change this year where we didn't have Mr. Potter and Mr. Randazzo teaching kindergarten.
Right. Right now, there's a 0.5 phys ed teacher at the kindergarten center. This would be to increase that position to 0.75. So, because in the past, people traveled, right, and they were there half a day, but they weren't really there half a day because they were losing travel time. and they'd be somewhere else for half a day. But, you know, we weren't getting the full coverage. So we put into the budget last year, it was approved, the part 0.5 teacher, or 0.56 maybe it was, at the kindergarten center. And it worked out fine, but there's still a need for some additional coverage, some additional classes, some additional support. So it would essentially not be hiring somebody else, it would just be bumping that position up to a little closer to full. Okay? Yes, sir.
So next year, is there going to be adding a coach for the girls lacrosse team?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
There'll be two positions for girls lacrosse that we'll have into the budget, just like the same type of positions as we had for boys, same dollar figure. You know, and that will be into the budget as also supplies for girls lacrosse. And again, the anticipation, everything indicates those numbers will warrant that.
That's actually on the next page here. For other non-personnel initiatives, I call that non-personnel because it was a program. It's a program that's being included. At the bottom, you'll see we have almost $47,000 in the budget, which includes this year's money budgeted for next year and REF funds to establish boys and girls lacrosse programs. So that is personnel and that is supplies. In terms of building improvements for next year, this is the money that these are the capital reserve funds we'd be using for non-referendum projects. Looking for roof replacements at the kindergarten center, which actually was in the first referendum 3 years ago. I don't know, lost track of time. But we had to take it out. Also, the pool over the roof over the high school pool is due for replacement as well, and that's been creating problems over there. Boiler replacements at Lincoln and Washington. These are just the plans for those. We have proposals from PSA to get that work done. At this point, we can wait another summer to actually get that work done, so that's what we're going to do. I am cognizant of spreading ourselves too thin with these projects. We have the referendum, we have some massive projects underway this summer at the high school and Union and Pierpont. So we tried to limit these projects, but we're getting some good things done here. Also a couple of replacement vehicles, a pickup truck and a courier van, and the panic bars at the high school gym. So that's all coming out of capital reserve. That was at $880,000 you saw on a previous screen. Just as a matter of comparison, for this year, 2021, these are the building improvements that we use capital reserve for. We upgraded the sound system at Pierpont. That we had to do because it wouldn't be able to accommodate the sound system from the new wing, so we had to upgrade the existing system. Performed some roof and gutter repair at Washington School. Upgraded the fire alarm system at the kindergarten center, their lintel replacement. Boiler upgrade here, card access upgrade. So all these things got done with capital reserve funds. These are outside the scope of the referendum, but we still got a lot of work done on things that were needed. And that's the point of the capital reserve. So going forward, the next steps. Excuse me, as I mentioned, we're expecting state aid figures in later this week. I'll let you know later this week how that works out. The Finance Committee is meeting again next Monday. And then March 15th, which is the next board meeting, we'll be looking for board approval to submit the budget, the preliminary budget, to the county office. That is due on March 22nd. I would hope to get that in within a few days of the 15th. And then we'll have a public hearing. The April 26th meeting is designated as the public budget hearing. And at that point, we'll be asking for final Board of Ed approval. And then once we receive that, then we're good to go and we start moving on purchases for next year and hiring and then making all those important decisions. Any questions? Yes. Panic bars are
They're like the crash bars?
On the doors.
So they're like the bars in the doors you go to
to
open?
get out. Yeah, that is something. Honestly, there's $16,000 in next year's budget for that. I also put that into the security grant, but that one hasn't even been funded yet, and I just don't know what's coming of that, so I just only throw it in the budget too. This is something that the fire inspector in town has been requesting of us for a number of years now.
When I was the principal here, we were trying to find a way to get that done. So it's been a while.
Anything else?
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Kelly, as far as the ESSER and Mr. Hurley, the ESSER 2 grant funding, and the way it reads, it says facilities improvements
Yes.
to eliminate or reduce the risk of, would there be room in there for filtration improvements in the buildings? You know, we had talked about that
Probably
one
not
time
with
ago.
that budget, but we would look into more, I think we'd look more into room air purifiers and that sort of thing. But, yeah, to the extent, like I said, this just came out on Friday, so we haven't even had a chance to consider what can be done here. And there's limited, minimal guidance on this stuff right now, so.
Keep in mind also that the high school Mortimer Wing project is replacing the chiller and putting a whole new ventilation system in the Mortimer Wing of the high school. The Pierpont Wing is getting a chiller, so that whole new wing was going to be part of that. And the Union Gymnasium and Science Labs in the old gym are also getting their new, so, you know, there will be improvements, right, in terms of, in those rather large areas of buildings. But to Mr. Kelly's point, we don't have all the details here yet. The thing that, you know, I'm most concerned, you know, well, it's not that I'm not concerned about ventilation, but, you know, we got to see what our clients, which are the students, are going to need. Now, that's the first set. See, what do we need? And, you know, it may turn out that there's going to be funding available for some other things, you know. It's literally, we got this Friday afternoon around 4 o'clock.
Something, yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, it's very new. But I thought, Mr. Kelly and I talked about this before, I thought it was important for the board to be aware of it and to be aware of the amount and to see how it's tying in with some of the planning we're doing already. We don't have a lot of answers yet. Yeah.
Anything else?
Three things, minor. For the vehicle, like, that's purchased through a state school program,
Yes.
right? Yes. Is there a chance to do it through a state, through a lease grant program? Did it not think that?
We could. I think if the budget gets that tight, I would look into that. But I'd prefer to handle it this way. But, yeah, I definitely would keep that in mind.
And with the added stipends, it looks like for past 2 years, the tuition gets blocked. Well, last year, the last bar looked like the same.
Yeah, it's pretty flat.
Pretty flat, the same rate during COVID.
Yeah, exactly, so.
One of the big, you know, a large number of our students go to the jointure.
What?
It's the large, you're talking about our out of district tuition, right? Numbers? A large number of our students go to the jointure, South Bergen jointure, which is a little less expensive, obviously, than the private schools. With the new leadership at the jointure, with Dr. Kuchar, he has put a, if not a freeze, certainly a minimal increase into tuition since he's been there. He's also provided a minimal amount of to member schools. I sit on the jointure board as a member. There's 13 of us who are member schools. He's also given us a little bit of reduction in tuition, so that's helped, you know. And you know, and again, I think we got to the point 5 years ago, 6 years ago, whatever it is now, longer than that, where it really was a major problem with the amount of money. And I think everyone's gotten better at being more aware in terms of choices and developing stronger programs here. And so I think it's helped. And but I think the jointure has changed as well. Leadership has helped with some costs. Because even though it's not a big expense, we have most of our kids go there. So you do the math, it's a bigger dip.
And one last part. that chart with the district activity? Now, Sally usually asks that question, she's not here, I'll ask you. I know you hate that.
No, I don't hate that chart. It proves a point.
Yeah,
No,
we just see
certainly.
for the public, when we see the public want to see if we are spending the least amount for students.
Yes.
in any-
Yeah, it's still the case, but yeah.
Right, that's still the case, and we could put that chart, I like that chart, I like to give my same spiel every year, I have it, I can tell you right now what I say. That's never gonna change, because of the cap, and if you take a look, I like the chart, the new chart, you talk about an old chart, how about the new chart? The new chart with the state aid
I like that.
and the budget, right? But if you take a look at the 1 year, that the blue line, right? 2014, no, I'm talking about I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong page. The orange line, whatever color it is, the history of state aid, right? And you look at that 1 year in 2010, 2011, when there was really no jump in our, but we did like a 0%. We never recovered from that. You know, if we went up 2%, 2.5%, you know, that we'd be up a little higher. That was penny wise and pound foolish, because it has put us behind. And, you know, to have the quality of programs and schools, to be one of the few schools in this South Bergen to be 1-to-1 3-4 years ago, and to spend the least amount is a credit. I mean, it's not a bad thing. You know, that's good, right? But, you know, sometimes when there's things, people, you know, knock on the door and say, why can't we this and why can't we that? You know? So I think, you know, this board, over the last several years, has recognized that, you know, staying at the cap allows us to not only maintain, but because of the fiscal management we have and the oversight we have, we're able to increase. You know, we not just we call it a maintenance budget, but we're increasing things every year. But yeah, that is a good chart to see, to let the public see, you know, where we, in terms of districts like us. So Mr. Kelly likes that chart.
Yeah,
So,
fine with
yeah, where that rumor start that he didn't like that chart. See, Dr. Racine, you're always starting rumors.
It's a big selling point to the public, though. They like, when they see that, they realize
Right.
it is good management.
More members, you know.
Is everybody's favorite chart?
It'll be there.
Should be
I think we have some people over here.
salad chart.
I'm sorry. A more general question, but have we seen the districts in student enrollment go up as of January 21? And the reason I'm asking that is just the change in the community, you know, the town, real estate and everything. Have we seen a jump in enrollment
Not anything beyond what we anticipated.
average?
And
If I may, we had a bit of a decrease. We do an annual October 15th count. That's the official count that gets reported. There was a bit of a decrease. And I think I mentioned to the Finance Committee a while back, we were looking to get a demographic study done. I had shared that with the borough to see if they wanted to go in with us, and I'm still waiting for an answer on that. So it may be time just to get moving on that. But yeah, we do. Yeah, I think it is important to look at what this town looks like right now.
so far, what has been advertised is not impacting, school hasn't. But, you know, we need to keep an eye on that. It's also an unusual year. You know, we had some students who decided to homeschool, which is different than going remote, right? That's withdrawing from school and being homeschooled. We had some kindergarten students who are part of our total enrollment. This was our lowest kindergarten enrollment that we've had in probably 6 years. I think some parents, maybe because of the pandemic, decided not to send a child to kindergarten. So far, our enrollment for first grade is exactly where it normally is at this time. So that would indicate to me that, you know, that was deliberate that some parents did not go to kindergarten. So this is an unusual year to look at numbers, you know. I also understand that from real estate that, you know, anecdotally, I will say, right, from real estate, that houses are selling very, very quickly in suburban areas. They're selling at prices sometimes that are higher than people are even asking for, because there is, you know, the exodus of some folks from the city. And that may start to level off, but right now, you know, I think there is a time where a lot of folks are moving out to places like Rutherford and, you know, even further out, right? So I think the demographic study that we want to try to get this company to do is going to be helpful, because I think the playing field has definitely changed since last March. But what that change means, you know, depends on, you know, what you're hearing, and we can't plan on what we're hearing.
Chris, and then I have a comment question.
So percentage-wise, what's our largest? Is it salaries is our biggest expense, or is it healthcare? Is it?
No, salaries, if we have, say, a $50 million budget, salaries are probably 29 million, something like that, so they're, you know, close to 60%. Benefits would be 5 to 6 million. District tuition would be in the 5 million range. So, I mean, those are the big ones.
Yeah, I think salary and benefits are like close to 80% of most schools' operating budgets,
Something
right?
like that, yeah.
Which is why when people talk about trying to cut a budget that is bare bones to begin with, there are no, you know, you can't, this building, the biggest building in the district, most students, most programs, right, most courses, most extracurricular, all that stuff. What's the operating budget here? The supply budget, discretionary spending is like 600,000, 500,
Something like that.
550, right? I mean, it's $550,000 for supplies and books and athletics and clubs and art and drama, right? So, you know, where are you cutting? So that's one of the hard parts about, and what I really give the board and the community and the administrators credit is that we've added positions, we've added programs, and keep in mind, and anybody who's skeptical, when you add a position, it's not that you're giving somebody a job, it's you're running an AP program you didn't have, or you're running an art program you didn't have, or a science program you didn't have, or a kindergarten that you didn't have, right? So it's a challenge, because the only place you can really make significant cuts is staffing, and staffing means programs, which is why I'm glad we haven't had to do that ever. The only staff we've ever reduced, we reduced because the program dried up. But we immediately created a new program using that line item for that position. So, you know, it's a challenge, but I think it's a fight worth winning. It's a fight having, because that's how you keep a good school system, you know, good, and the old good to great adage.
So I wanted to start with just a note of appreciation for the presentation and walking us through all this. In particular, I always like seeing year-over-year comparison, so I appreciated the, you know, building improvements, what this year's look like, next year, so it gives us a comparison and a framework. Personally, I just want to say I think this grant funding is huge, and I just hope everyone understands how huge it is, because I think it allows the district, without having to use its own funds, to think creatively about what is going to be lingering in this pandemic in the next fiscal year, but also in the next 2 years, when we get out of this, what is it that students and staff and the district is going to need? And this funding going through 2023, you know, sort of has the potential to take us into the remainder of this pandemic and beyond a little bit. And so I really think that that's great. It'll be great to hear a little bit more about that when you get the specs. The only question I had, I guess, was around staffing. And I know this is sort of like I don't know if it's an abstract question, but I know this year there's so much that happens every time there's a case. You have to quarantine, school's got to close, does it have enough staff or whatnot? So I guess my only question or thought is, as you think about the next fiscal year, under personnel, is there any thought or need about any interim staffing for this coming year if you continue to get into a space of having to quarantine students or whatnot to support, you know, the district and schools, whether it's, you know, remote staff supporting or additional staff coming into classrooms, that sort of thing?
Yeah. Well, you know, the first, I don't see how that would work without going into too long of an answer. And of course, you know, I haven't had time to really process it. you know, one of the reasons why we have staffing issues is with having to close school. We say we're closing a school for 2 weeks due to staffing issues because that's the truth, but we also want people to understand there may be one person who tested positive. It's not 15 people sick in the school. And as long as you're running a high school or a middle school and you have to quarantine people who are where Mr. Fogno is sitting right now filming us. If he was a study hall teacher and I'm a study hall student and I'm sitting here and he's got a mask on and I got a mask on and I'm positive, Mr. Fogno, who saw me for 20 minutes in study hall, has to quarantine. As long as that's the rule, we're going to be closing school every time somebody gets sick. And my concern is, where do we get these people and what do they do when, and how does the budget support them when that doesn't happen? Now, the real issue we're having this year too is with substitutes, not just us, everybody. You know, they're hard to come by. They're always hard to come by. We always have a substitute shortage. This year, some people, sometimes your substitutes are people that are my age, right? Older. They don't want to come into a building during a pandemic. Sometimes they're college kids. They don't want to come into a building because they don't want to get the chance of being quarantined and now they can't do their college stuff. So your pool is shrunk. Every school district in the state is searching for subs, so the ones they have, so we can't cover. So I think in theory is a good idea. I don't know if it's one thing I have to hope is going to happen next year is that at the very least we begin to follow whatever the rules are for close contact and not rules that aren't the rules.
Gotcha. All right, you answered my question. Thank you.
Sergio, so there's also the updated quarantine guidelines once people start to get vaccinated.
Right.
So vaccinated faculty will likely not have to quarantine
Right.
in that situation.
Right, and I sent that all to you, and that is going to be, I know we're on a different topic than budget, but that is going to help if that stays, where if you've been quarantined, if you've been positive or within 3 months, or if you've been vaccinated. Now, I'm hoping that 3 months for the vaccination is going to get elongated after a while, because come September, everybody will be past 3 months, right? Faculty, hopefully. Yeah. So I'm hoping that changes, but I think things are going to get better in that regard. I would hope, but look, it is very frustrating to the parents, to the kids, to the teachers, to the administration, to have to close down buildings because one person's sick. I'll give you one interesting. I'm going to say it anyway. Then I'll stop. Okay, but we have quarantined 420 students at the high school this year. And 40 faculty members. So it's 460. And of those 460, thankfully, no one's been positive. But that's a lot of people to have to quarantine. So, don't get me wrong. I want everybody to be safe, but I think if we could start following the rules a little more as they're written, we'll be able to keep schools open more. My concern has been and is growing is what's happening to kids' psyche.
I'm sorry, what was it?
Psyche, emotional, that's my concern. And we're seeing more and more data, both locally and statewide and nationally, that there's an impact on kids who aren't in school. So we're hoping, vaccine, declining numbers, keeping reasonable rules in place, everybody following them, that maybe in September we have a little more, maybe not totally normal, but a little closer.
Okay, so I think we started into the report of the superintendent.
I have a very short report.
So we will turn it over to you to
Well,
complete that.
That's right, it's going to be shorter now. I was going to talk about some of the things I already spoke about. I have to report every year, twice a year, on the Student Safety Data System report. And you'll see it's always a good report, that we don't have a lot. This year we have virtually nothing, right? We've had one incident that led to a suspension. that means it's something that was not violence, vandalism, or substance. That's what that means, right? So some failure to comply or misbehavior, but it's separate from that. We've had no reports in the district of violence, vandalism, substance, weapons. We've only had one HIB alleged and one HIB confirmed. This is up to December 31st. And the trainings and the programs, trainings are things we do with teachers about, HIB and maintaining and providing safe environment. Programs are things we do for kids, okay? So I have to do the report in 2 phases. That's the first report. I always tell you the numbers are extremely positive and low for a school district of our size. This year, obviously, with hybrid days and kids in remote learning. But keep in mind, we're still doing discipline for kids who are in, remote learning. If a student is not doing something in a Zoom class, he's being addressed. So I think it's a positive sign in terms of behavior. I don't know if anybody has any questions on that. The only other thing I was going to mention about the Professional Development Day. I already did that. I was going to mention, I want to mention one other thing, and then I'll be done. We're getting in time of year now when we're getting near the end of the year, right? Spring will be around here, and we're thinking of things. So we're beginning to think about things like, what are we going to do with prom? What are we going to do with prom or graduation and so on? And really, right now, we're not in a much better place than we were last year. The numbers of people allowed to be indoors, be outdoors, haven't really changed. Now, I did see an encouraging thing today about outdoor gatherings, that apparently the governor announced that MetLife Stadium can now have 15% beginning, I think, in March, people in attendance at events there. So, that might be something moving forward. But what we've done here at the high school with the seniors is beginning to try to be creative if we can. So we're looking at maybe doing a musical in the spring, the outdoors, and in an outdoor venue. Again, we have it planned. We have to make sure we can have people there above 25, right? But that we have that plan. We took the senior prom date. We've moved it. A letter went out to the senior parents over the weekend, and we have a place in June 16th, which is a little late, but there's an outdoor venue that can hold people up to several hundred, and we're probably going to change it. The senior prom is the one event that you could bring a date or a guest from outside of the school. We're going to say only seniors, nobody from outside, nobody from underclass, because that would make it 150 to 180. But right now, it's like 25. So we made it very clear to the parents and students, we have the date, place reserved, but the restrictions have to change. Graduation, we're thinking about high school graduation. We're going to have a meeting in a week or so about high school and union school. I know Mr. Schweitz has been talking to the parents down there and faculty and staff. At the high school, again, we're hoping that we would be at least what we had in July, in June, maybe better. I don't know if any of you have gotten to see the device, the cameras that we purchased and parents can pay for to see sporting events in the gym, but they're great. They actually follow the ball. I don't know how they do it, but they do it. That's also been installed down at Tryon Field for use of athletic events. So we would have that option as well, potentially for graduation if it's restricted. The point is, we're still limited. We still can't do the things we normally do, but we're planning workarounds, and if the regulations allow it, we'll be able to do something. And we're starting to get that word out to the seniors, okay? Even the junior dinner dance, which we don't call a junior prom, we call it a junior dinner dance, always a lower key. We do have a date in a venue for that, but that is indoor only, so that may not come to fruition, but we're trying. I'm hoping that we'll have it. I'm hoping that the governor and the Department of Education this year can come up with a definitive plan sometime in early May, not in early June like last year when you really have to scramble to try to get things done. And whatever it is, we'll work with. Okay? So I'm done. Finally.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hurley. Any questions?
Mr. Hurley, has there been any discussion, to your knowledge, at the county or state level about prioritizing administration teacher vaccinations? Has there
For
been any-
vaccines?
Yeah.
Yes, there's been a lot of discussion, but we haven't gotten anywhere. Back in, real quick, back in December, or late December, early January, when the vaccine first came out, I met with Mayor Nunziata, and he was going to appeal to the county to get some vaccines here and utilize the schools and school nurses and the Board of Health nurses to do EMT and fire and police and teachers and so on. But the county did not want to allow that to municipalities, with the exception of Paramus and Ridgewood. They then pulled back on those two, so now it's nowhere in the county. We've been hearing teachers are in 1B, 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 but we haven't gotten to 1B yet. I check a lot of categories, and I can't get an appointment anywhere. It's frustrating. We are trying, and my county association has been pushing and offering schools, offering nurses, offering everything we can if we can get teachers and and school personnel, not just teachers, school personnel vaccinated. I think it would be a great thing if we could do it. It would also be great if we could do it in a system where teachers don't have to scramble and then have to take time off because, they get an appointment in Burlington or they get an appointment wherever. And, if we could do it in a localized place where maybe it's from, we have a one-session day and from 1 o'clock to 6 o'clock, there's vaccines. We've been knocking on a lot of doors, nobody's answering.
Ms. Ahmed?
I noticed online, who's the who did, I think one thing, they have teachers and administration. Are the board members considered administration?
After what happened to that superintendent in Connecticut, I'm not answering that question. I don't know. I really don't know. I think they're looking at more, my gut is they're looking at people that are day-to-day with kids.
Yeah.
So my guess would be no. But I don't know. I haven't seen anything on that. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm not going to say it, but look up what happened to a superintendent in Connecticut with Board of Ed vaccinations.
Okay.
Google that.
All right, we are going to move on to the report of the president. So I was going to give some kudos and appreciation to all of the faculty, the staff, administrators for all their ongoing hard work, creative efforts. I was also going to give a shout out to the live streaming happening with the athletics. I was going to say it's really great. I will give you one piece of advice for someone who has a freshman on a basketball team. When you're going to watch a game, if you're going to watch a in particular student, make sure you know their number because it's a lot of people running around to try to figure out who's who. But it's really been great just to see all the efforts to really try to engage families, as much as possible and as part of a community effort. Also, just wanted to give the district kudos because, when we look back on this time, I think we're going to recognize that Rutherford was one of the few districts that really stayed open. Yeah, it had to quarantine, had to close for, 14 days here and there for cases, but never really went remote over the year, for any other reason except it absolutely had to. So, as they say, fighting the good fight, and I just appreciate all the efforts because that's not the easier road to take. For anyone when you're constantly having to go through and talk to Department of Health constantly. So just wanted to acknowledge that. Also wanted to signal appreciation for all the work on the referendum and staying on top of things because, now things are happening. Things are still on schedule, ahead of schedule. The financials are looking strong in terms of meeting all the, different referendum projects. The Finance Committee, Buildings and Grounds, great job on continuing to stay involved and on top of things with all the projects happening. And then, so we've got the high school academic decathlon team competing in the state championship on February 26th and 27th. Good luck to them. It's very exciting. And then I also just wanted to thank Mr. Early in particular for the interim report of district goals. So, we have a number of district goals that, we review at the beginning of the year. And it's one thing to make goals. It's one thing to say at the end of the year, these are the goals you've accomplished or not. But giving an interim report, really holding, I think, the district accountable and showing this is the progress we're making. I mean, some of these were pages and pages of progress. So I just want to say I really appreciated the time taken to give that interim report to show the growth. And then finally, just in terms of our own board goals. So, one of the things that is a board goal this year is making sure we're on top of construction and renovation projects. We talked about that. Successfully negotiating with the collective bargaining agreements for the RSA and the RAA, and those are happening and in progress. And then finally, just continuing to think about the work we do as a board and how we continue to grow as a board. So which leads me to the last point, which is the board self-evaluation. So I wanted to thank everyone for their participation in this. Personally, as the one who is analyzing this, I will say from that viewpoint, I found this format to be fantastic, to really be able to provide a good synopsis and analysis of how we viewed the work of the board. So I know it might not have been 100%, the easiest thing to go into and complete, and I think we can continue to work on that. But I want to give Dr. Racine also a lot of credit for all the work he did on not just creating that on Google, but dealing with my text messages and emails when I was asking for you to help me figure out how to download some kind of a raw data summary that everyone could read easily, and you did a great job with that, so thank you for that. And just to highlight, real quick, overall, just a couple of summary points, and I'd love to hear any thoughts that board members have. I thought it was interesting. First of all, I think that the board evaluated itself as a whole and individually in a way that reflects a really strong board. I thought it was interesting that we sort of saw the board as a whole as a little bit stronger in terms of our evaluation than individual performance. I think that's a sign of a strong board, that we work well together, but we're also hard on ourselves and trying to strive to continue to improve with a real high on ethical behavior, effective preparation, goal setting, staff appreciation. I think all those are important. The strengths of the board, to me, I was really proud. And I know I've felt this and I've said this before, but to see that we really agreed that teamwork, preparedness, support for superintendent and district administrators, mutual respect and collaboration, an ethic of care for the district and students, purity of motive and purpose, and individual strengths being leveraged well, board members. The fact that we saw those as positives, I see those too, and I also think it is a signal of a well-functioning board. In terms of areas for growth, I think some of these things are things that we continue to talk about, community engagement, interactions. I'm glad that we see that as an area for improvement and growth because it's super important that we're engaged with the community and interacting. So I think we should always be striving to continue to, to do more. I think finance and budget understanding, has come up before, and I think more presentations like the one this evening are helpful in getting people to ask questions. Supporting new board members. I know that right now there's you meet with Mr. Hurley and Mr. Kelly in the beginning of your time, and there's mandatory training. There are different types of training that you have. So you've got your sort of governance 1 for new board members, governance 2, finance, governance 3, student achievement, 4, legal updates, and depending on where you are, you're sort of doing those annually. So, and I know, Mr. Kelly, I appreciate that you copy me when other people have board trainings or when I have board training to make sure to do. And I think, so I have those dates and times here, and I could email people offline, but it's just important that you continue to make sure that you're doing all the board trainings that you need to be doing. And obviously, right now, we're in a virtual space, so everything's virtual. And I'm going to channel my Mrs. Jones and say that when they are in person, the in-person ones are very thorough and worth trying to, go to if you can. And then just wanted to say that I think that in terms of additional focus and training for all of us, I think that, the board role, continuing to see ourselves as a strategic board and what that means, and discussing that. There was thoughts about diversity, equity, inclusion training, mindfulness training, negotiations training for, if you're on a negotiations team, maintaining an excellent relationship with the town. And I appreciate that that was an area we continue to grow in, as well as something we want to be on top of as a challenge moving forward and opportunity to do, and that's a priority, maintaining that excellent relationship. The RHS pool and field, thinking about ways that, we continue to think about them. And then the last thing, and then I'll open it up to everyone, I really liked a comment that was made about round robin discussions of sort of what each committee is doing. And I think it's an interesting thing that we might think about a little bit. So, for example, each chair talking a little bit about, like what you give a board report and you will highlight what's happening and what the motions are. But there may be an opportunity to step back and to say, here are the types of things the committee's discussing, and really giving everyone an overview, because you don't know what you know when you've been on the board for a while and when you're in a committee for a while. So that's something that I think, we can think about as well. That said, I want to open it up and see what people's thoughts, reactions, ideas, clarifications are. Mrs. Ahmed?
Going over the evaluation, there was different comments, someone commented on, for us to get to know other board members, their likes or, things about them, their background, that, well, we haven't come up, but I've been on the board for a long time, and I'm sure other people that are new board members don't know anything much about me. We don't really have a chance to ever discuss, like, what are your likes, what do you for, being for, stuff, There was a one superintendent, she had ideas that we would, go to some river, make boats and float them down, and I don't want to go that wide.
I rolled my eyes then, I'm rolling them now.
I mean, they've had all different ways. And, but I thought that was nice that somebody wanted to really get to know the people. And if that's so, I don't know how we could start it, but I think it's a good idea to use NonPersonnel.
Yeah.
We're all working for the school,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's a little harder in these pandemic conditions to do that. I will say that the way that I've gotten to know board members in my time on the board is going to events with board members. And Mrs. Ahmed's laughing because I went, I think in my first or second year with Ms. Jones and Ms. Ahmed to an end of the year, I think the faculty staff gala that happens at the end, and I sat in between both of them and we chatted for a while, and that was the first time that, we actually had a real conversation. So I think when we're able to go back in person, being able to go together in groups to different events is a great opportunity. So it's a point well taken.
I'm going to make one, you channel Mrs. Jones, I'd like to channel Mrs. Jones. If and when we get back to the school board convention in Atlantic City, I know it's difficult to take off from work and all that, but we see schools down there that have their entire boards or 4 or 5 boards, and you get your training done, you get some workshops, and then there's the ability to socialize, and that's how you get to know people. And it's, often we have 1 or 2 board members going. I know it's a challenge, but that's a great way. Now, that may or may not happen this October, all that's still up in the air. But I think that's another good opportunity. And you kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You get training done, and you get to
That's a great point.
socialize.
So any other comments about the board self-evaluation? Mr. Sprayberry?
Yeah, one of the things I noticed, maybe you look at one of the pages on here, And it says they're recognizing that the board's highest priorities is to improve student achievement. What are the major challenges facing our district? 7 of 8 comments, every one of them said about the COVID. And I think, Mr. Hurley, when you said it earlier, when are the studies going to happen? When are we going to look at what the effect is on these kids? With a teenager in the school system, home, I see it day to day. I see how this child has changed, not as much on the elementary, but more on the middle school kids. And, one of the things I wrote down is, looking at the race of like, what's their effect of, suicide, drug use, absentees, what's the grades, they changing, the graduation rates, or pass fail, classes and students' grades within like Union Middle School and high school. So I think those are important things that come out of our board. If you see this board here, a majority sees that, the state and everybody else has got to see it. And those studies are going to have to happen soon to see what the long-term effect is on this. And then the last statement is on the committees. I think it's, the round robin and even putting people on different committees, moving people around, within that, but also having just discussions as a group, on the committees. I think it helps everybody here with a better understanding.
I think once we get this, you have to be patient. I think once we get the group figuring out how we're going to assess, what we're going to do, I'll keep you informed. This is going to be a multi-year process. I just very briefly, you talked about graduation rates and grades, right? Well, that's, who knows, are grades inflated because kids are virtually zooming in and teachers are recognizing the constraints they have, or are grades dropping? We don't even know how to use the measurements that we normally use, right? Because the whole dynamic of it's changed. The whole landscape is different. So we're working at it. We're going to work at it. The most immediate thing, though, is what you said first. The depression, the emotional, that you can see by looking at somebody. You can see by having a conversation. And to me, that's always should be our priority. So that's one of the things I asked Ms. Holland to begin to gather ways to assess, to start getting data. And we're going to have to really reach out to the parents to allow us to do that. Sometimes people are very, we get pushback for that. We don't want you asking those questions. We don't want you looking, but we're going to have to really come up with some we're reaching out to Care Plus, for example, that provides, for some advice and guidance. So again, we can't go slow, but we have to go methodically and do it the right way.
Dr. Zin?
These are great. I love these. Most of these items, though, I look at it and I kind of feel that you know how to go about it. Either they're training, either things we learn or communication, things we say. There's one item on here, though, that I don't know how to go about, and I think it's very important. How to reduce stress of the CFA and the faculty staff. What can we as a board do when to reduce the stress of our students, whatever our faculty and our staff employees, that they're going through hell too. I don't know how we do that.
I don't know how you can do that. I don't know. I think we are doing, there's some things in my interim goal report. That's not a lot of details there, but talks about things that were done for faculty and staff, little things. We certainly, our SACs, our student assistance counselors, are cognizant of their needs. We certainly have reached out to individuals when we had to. It is a challenge. Especially when we want, all of us have to put the kids first and serve them. But, we got to be aware of what's going on with them too. So I agree, it's a challenge. But we are addressing it. I'm not going to say we're addressing it successfully or as much as we should, or maybe we are. I don't know yet. I don't know how to measure it, but we are addressing it. And I think the board's role in this is to, the role that you play, to hear the information and play very well. To get the information that I bring to you, or that data brings to you, to talk to you about the needs that I think we have, what we might need in terms of funding or positions or programs or time, because all those things require board approval, right? So, I think the biggest message that can go out to faculty, to parents, to students, is that the board is understanding, empathetic, wants to be proactive, and will follow, the needs of the guidance as presented, as long as the information is there to support it. I think that's the best message that the board can send. And I think you send that message. You heard about this grant tonight, and it wasn't like, it was all, well, what can we spend it on? Can we use it for this? Can we use it for that? There wasn't a reluctance, right? I think that's the board's role. And I think the board, I think this board is perceived that way. I know you worry sometimes about communications and perception. I think it is perceived by the school community as being one of involvement, of interest, and of willingness to exercise their authority in a way that's best for the students. I really think that's the perception people have. And you should be proud of that.
Mr. Mazzone?
First, I want to again thank Greg, for organizing that Google Doc. Having done the board's self-evaluation in the past, it's been a little more painful. I found this was easier, at least as a board member, to put your responses in a comprehensive way, but also to you, Sergio, for compiling all the data as well as the summary report. I think it made it really synthesized, easy to digest. Hearing everybody's discussion here and thinking about the district goals that were included in our packet for this meeting, and I think that as we go forward, just aligning the board goals with what Jack is talking about in kind of a strategic and deliberate way as to how we, as you said, supporting whether they're new positions, whether it's as Jack knows out, James pointed out, some of the areas where we may have gaps. But I think we should really, take a hard look and think about what our goals as a board are this year, and just working to, ensuring not only they align with the district, that they're putting students first, to, Greg's concern about our faculty and staff, what we can do to promote them, what we can do to help elevate them. I think this is a long haul, right? As we're coming back, I think it's important to align them.
Yeah, it's great points. Ms. Ahmed?
Yeah, somehow it came home in the packet and you read all the stuff and it just came back to me about how the teachers, there was like 4 teachers explain what their days are like.
I mean, the articles that were written?
Yeah. Some article I read in one thing, and it was like breaking my heart really, because the one teacher, they all, the children at home didn't have like a supply or something, so they were going and delivering it to the house, this person. Do you remember which one that was?
Yes. Yeah, I won't say her name, but you're.
All right, but anyway, I'm so proud of the teachers in Rutherford. They go above and beyond. You see them when they speak, they're involved with children and other things they don't get paid for. So I appreciate them, and I've always been so proud to be in personnel. And I thank them for everything. Right now, everyone is depressed. Everyone is going through, their times at home, and yet these teachers have gone above and beyond and swallowed their own problems that they have and helped these children who are really, like you said, have emotional problems. So I appreciate them, and please give them thanks.
I will do that. And I do convey, I take notes of things that Dr. Alati says or the board members say, and I try to get the word to either, if not the teacher, to the building administrator so they could share it with the teacher. I want people to know the board's supportive and understands. To your point today, and you all can appreciate how busy it is for me, for the administrators, for the teachers. And I spent 40 minutes today on a Zoom with an administrator, a supervisor, and a child study team member who is in the category of a teacher, discussing one student who's got some issues with remote learning that, it could very easily just dismiss as that's his kid's issues. And we spent about 40 minutes trying to solve this problem that's the kind of approach that we're all taking. And it is incredibly time consuming. And it's incredibly, and sometimes there is no, like there wasn't an easy answer here. We left those 40 minutes with a couple of things we're going to try, but there's no easy answer because we've never been through this. We're not sure what the answer is. So, we're not perfect. We have our moments, the teachers do, the administrators do, where, we're not perfect, but I will say that I think the staff, the faculty, and the board has done a tremendous amount of mental and physical work to get the schools open. And, just think, when Dr. Alati said about the referendum, we got these major projects going on. And go back to board meetings, how much time have we spent talking about those, except for the screens? And how much time have we spent talking about this pandemic, this health emergency? And rightly so. But if you told me a year ago, I thought we'd be staying up nights about the project. Maybe it's going along well because we're staying out of the way. I don't know. That could be it too.
Ms. Jones?
Just add one more thing. The mention of bringing back the board member retreat. We did do that. Shelley will remember we did it with Leslie O'Keefe when she was our superintendent, and we did it once with Rosemary Jones. It's a good thing to do. People get to share openly. We've held them on a Saturday morning. In the building, we're not able to go out anymore, and not only for COVID, but rules change. Years ago, they actually went to a restaurant and had them, but you just can't do that anymore. But I do think it's a nice time to air feelings, and that you have to advertise it, but you pick a time when,
Yeah, I'm not necessarily opposed to that. I think
I'm
what I
sorry.
would want to do is make sure, and I'll talk to Mr. Kelly about it, maybe talk to even the attorney about it. How you have to advertise it. It's got to be a public meeting. The board, right, because you have all the board members together. How do we do that to have the kind of retreat aspect you want? That's always been confusing to me, because the 9 board members gather, it's now an open public meeting. So I'd have to find out I realize districts do it. I'd have to find out how that gets done. Because the purpose of the retreat is almost like professional development for the board.
So I would just say that I think we can figure it out in terms of how districts do it, and that's one aspect. I think that all of our time is definitely valuable, and we all give of a lot of our time. I will say, given the time we're in now with this pandemic, I think a board retreat or just an opportunity that can be partially just like Mrs. Ahmed said, getting to know one another, having a good time together, and building that sense of team could be a really interesting thing, right, post-pandemic, to be able to get, something that we could do that could be exciting.
How about like at the beginning of every meeting, one person will introduce themselves, if we have new board members, tell a little of our background, how many years if we've been on the board, or,
So I'm just going to warn you, I'm a former summer camp director. So if you want to get into it, I can come up with all kinds of activities we can do for the first 10 minutes of every meeting. But no, I think but I hear what you're saying. I think there are some creative opportunities. So I'm going to think about that for the next board meeting. So get ready.
Okay.
It's a challenge. Dr. Senior.
We did a retreat, it was just a summer meeting. It was a public meeting, but still there. What came out of that was a planning stage.
Right.
So there are.
But that really wasn't a retreat. That was not in a pure sense. That was a special meeting, and there was one person there, but he left. He came and he made a presentation. And again, it's not that we want to not meet in public, but I think the idea of the old days retreat was literally like a retreat. You go somewhere and, I'm not sure we could do that anymore under the laws, but I'm sure there's a way to do it under the Open Public Meeting Act. We just have to figure it out.
Like, that we took from one session, that was.
Yeah, I mean, I think we just have to figure it out. I mean, independent schools are governed very differently, but we hold a retreat every year, and it's considered a closed session. So it's just, there is no open session to it, so, yeah. Any other comments or questions about either my report or the board self-evaluation? Okay, hearing none, we're going to move to the open part of the meeting, where we'll open the meeting up to the public for any comments related to the board agenda at 9:05 p.m. Since we have no one in person, we'll go to our remote folks. Nope? Okay. Hearing no comments, we're going to close that portion at 9:06. And now we're going to move into new business, where action will be taken. We're going to zoom through, starting with, no pun intended. We're going to start with personnel. Mrs. Ahmed.
Thank you, Dr. Number one, I can't do this. What? No, it's up. Technical trouble. To accept retirement, Mr. Fazio, who's a teacher at Pierpont School. That's number one. Two, Caitlin McIver, also resignation of Miss McIver, teacher assistant at Pierpont School. Three, Megan Garrity, long-term substitute approval for Ornette Katzen, who is a long-term substitute elementary teacher at Pierpont. Five, Gloria San Pietro, to approve extension of an uncompensated leave without pay to the teacher at the high school from March 8th to 31st. Oh, my glasses don't get foggy here. Where was that? Orange, yes. Did I do number 4? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're up to number 6.
All right. I can't see these numbers here too well either. Helene Wetzel, extension of uncompensated leave without pay. Special ed teacher at Rutherford High School. Kristen Davis, to increase hours from 4 to 5.9 hours per day. 8, Brian Mahoney, approved disability leave Brianne, I'm sorry, maternity leave. 9, substitute teacher, to approve substitute teachers Michael Hughes and Ornette Katzen. And 10, substitute teachers, approval for a teacher assistant, Michael Hughes also, and travel reimbursements is number 11. That's reimbursement for the school year for Janine Smith and Gianna Lampart. And then we have an addendum here, personnel, Christina Knapp, full-time status, to increase her from part-time to full-time status, an elementary education teacher at Washington School. And 13, Mary Olivo. Olivo? Fine. I don't know, Olivo? That's cute. An increase from part-time, from 4 to part-time from 56, elementary teacher at Washington School, effective March 1st through June 30th. And that's it for your approval.
All right. Any comments or questions from anyone?
Just a quick mention of Mrs. DeFazio,
Right.
who is, retired over 30 years in the district and close to 40 in education. And she certainly, if you ever seen Pierpont's concerts, she's like Mr. Holland up there directing, and has that respect of the students and the community. A Rutherfordian, so she's a real fixture in our arts program here, so we'll miss her.
Arms are great.
Yep.
Wonderful job she did.
Yep. Okay, Mrs. Ahmed, do you want to move those?
So with your approval, I hope to present and hope to move personnel items 1 through 13.
All right, we have a second. Mr. Conti, any last comments or questions? Hearing none, Mr. Kelly?
Mrs. Ahmed,
Yes.
Mr. Bogosian,
Yes.
Mr. Conti,
Yes.
Mr. Healy,
Yes.
Mrs. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Mazzone?
Yes.
Dr. Racine?
Yes.
Mr. Sprayberry?
Yes.
Dr. Alati?
Yes.
Motion's carried. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We're going to move on to curriculum and instruction. Mrs. Jones?
Thank you. We did not have a curriculum and instruction meeting. I did attend the PTA meeting at Washington School. Mr. McKay couldn't be there. It was kind of a brief meeting, but it was good. I gave an overlook of what the board has been doing with the referendum, and they were happy with that. There are three resolutions tonight. One, out of district placements with the attached list. Two, bridge program liaison, which is where Mr. Nick Barry, our assistant principal at the high school, is the liaison. And three, there are 6 students to receive home instruction. As Mr. Hurley can tell us more about the bridge program liaison.
The bridge program, as you know, is that option for a student for a 5th year. Right, we talked about that. Part of the requirement of the state mandate is that you establish a liaison whose job it is to get the information out to the students, develop with the student the educational program that may include a community college, right? So everyone has to have a liaison. So Mr. DeBarry is assuming that role. For the board's information, the program, if you wanted if a student wanted to apply to be part of the bridge program for next year, they had to apply by February 15th, and we have 2 students who have indicated that they want to participate.
Okay. Any questions or comments? Hearing none. Mr. Jones, you want to move this?
I move resolutions 1 through 3 under curriculum and instruction.
All right, we have a second. Mr. Mazzone, any last comments or questions? Hearing none. Mr. Kelly, please take roll.
Mrs. Ahmed?
Yes.
Mr. Bogosian?
Yes.
Mr. Conti?
Yes.
Mr. Healy?
Yes.
Mrs. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Mazzone?
Yes.
Dr. Racine?
Yes.
Mr. Sprayberry?
Yes.
Dr. Alati?
Yes.
Motion's carried. Thank you.
All right, next we'll move on to finance. Dr. Racine.
Finance, we have 4 motions. I'm sorry, there was the committee meeting. I have my phone. Easy part was, committee meeting, we discussed 2 things. One, the audit, which Mr. Maroney talked about, and 2, the budget update, which Mr. Kelly talked about. So I don't need to update it. All right, there are 4 items. 1, the approval of bills. 2 is to accept the results of the 1920 audit, to accept the recommendation of the audit. Number 3 is to accept the peer review of the audit. Number 4 is to accept the donation from Donors Choose for some Play and Learn with Math Games project. That's it.
Okay. Questions or comments? So don't people donate to Donors Choose, but we're getting a donation from Donors Choose?
Right, the people donate to Donors Choose in order to provide then something, right, to when you're donating for a school, and then the school says X number of dollars we have, and the school will say, we'd like these math programs, or we'd like, so that's how
Okay.
it works.
Got it.
If I may?
Yep. Mr. Kelly.
Number 2, the accepting of the audit report. This also includes the corrective action plan. I just want to make sure we square this circle here that there was one recommendation that had to do with the Rutherford Community School. The corrective action plan is to develop a plan with them as to what the next steps are and how they get back to profitability. So that's what that corrective action plan states, and we've already had the meeting, as you know, with the Rutherford Community School, and the ball's in their court right now to develop a plan.
Do we have a timeline on hearing
Yes.
back from them on that?
Say that again?
Do we have a timeline on hearing back from them on that?
We gave them 2 weeks, which would be next Friday, whatever day that is, March 5th or something.
And we will have something, I think, prior to that. We had a preliminary conversation today. So by the next board meeting, we'll be able to fill in the gaps in the plan let you know where we're at.
All right, Dr. Racine, you want to move those?
Like to move them.
All right.
Sure.
We have a second. Mr. Sprayberry, any last comments, questions? Hearing none, Mr. Kelly, please take roll.
Mrs. Ahmed?
Yes.
Mr. Bogosian?
Yes.
Mr. Conti?
Yes.
Mr. Healy?
Yes.
Mrs. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Mazzone?
Yes.
Dr. Racine?
Yes.
Mr. Sprayberry?
Yes.
Dr. Alati?
Yes.
Motion's carried. Thank you.
Okay, next up, we have policy. Mr. Healy.
We did not have a committee meeting since our last board meeting, and there are no motions this evening.
Okay.
For Mr. Healy and members of the committee, I received a packet last week from Strauss Esme. I'm reviewing it with the supervisors, as we always do, and the administrators, and I'll be getting it out to the committee, probably early next week, middle of next week, so we can make a decision like we've done in the past, whether we need to meet or whether we could do it just via review and potentially be able to move them for first reading on the 15th. Okay?
Didn't we just do one recently?
Yeah, they come out, there's always quarterly, but they also come out when the need arises if something's bubbled up.
Got it. Okay, so we're going to move on to buildings and grounds. Mr. Sprayberry.
Good evening. We did not have a committee meeting this month, but we do have one motion to put forth for two fire code change orders, and I will turn it over to Mr. Kelly to give us an explanation on those.
Of course. Change orders for the kindergarten center, contractors Brahma Construction, total of additional cost of $11,500. This leaves the allowance at about $19,000, I think, but they're looking to wrap up this project by early April, is the last I heard. So I think we're in good shape with this one. If you remember, Mr. Healy, this is the one we said we've always had some concern that they were burning through that allowance, but I think we're in a good place now at this point, all things considered. These are a number of smaller things, requests from the fire code official, also IDF cabinetry in the nurse's office. If you've ever happened to be in the nurse's office, if you're not careful when you walk into that door, you'll go face first into the electronic equipment that powers the building. So we're working to get a cabinet on that just to, for aesthetics, for safety, for every good reason. And that was not part of the original plan. The signage upcharge is, that's about $1,000 of that $11,000. That's for the plaque that will go up at the kindergarten center to acknowledge the construction. So we'll have, and in fact, the upcharge is because it has every board member's name on it, but we asked them to expand it so that some of the board members who are no longer on the board, but were part of the planning, will be listed on that plaque as well. So that's that. The other one is at Pierpont School, the $65,000. This was a disagreement between our architects and the fire code official. The architects had designed the wing at Pierpont as an addition to the original building. And so they made their plans accordingly, and that was at the wishes of the board, and the administration, of course. The fire code official has determined that he considers it to be a new structure, a standalone structure, which requires different, more extensive detectors and just a more comprehensive system as a standalone building. I think the rationale was that there is a firewall in there, but anyway, it's the fire code official has requested this. We've tried to push back, but ultimately it's the interests of safety and security of the building. So it's just a disagreement of the code, but the fire official wins.
So on Pierpont, how much is left in the allowance then?
A lot. Pierpont had an allowance of about $250,000. I think there was only about 12 to 15 used prior to this. So we're still, at the $175,000.
So are we,
Balance.
clearly we're going to expect this similar fire code issue across all the other buildings and projects?
Well, no, I think this has been under discussion long enough that this was incorporated into the plans at Union.
Okay, great.
So this should not be an issue.
Great.
Also, Union has the gym with a walkway, right? The high school, that's the only other new construction. Pierpont is, 11 classrooms, 5 offices, a gym. I don't agree that it's a standalone structure, but it's a much more extensive addition. So I don't expect we'll see this at Union School.
Any other comments? All right, Mr. Sprayberry, do you want to move this?
I'd like to move motion 1 for buildings and grounds, please.
All right, we have a second. All right, Mr. Bogosian, any last comments or questions? Hearing none, Mr. Kelly?
Mrs. Ahmed?
Yes.
Mr. Bogosian?
Yes.
Mr. Conti?
Yes.
Mr. Healy?
Yes.
Mrs. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Mazzone? Dr. Racine?
Yes.
Mr. Sprayberry?
Yes.
Dr. Oladi?
Yes.
Motion carried. Thank you.
All right, we're going to move into old business. Is there any old business to bring up? Mrs. Ahmed?
I forgot to mention before that I attended the high school PTA, which I always love to go to. And I won't tell you the whole thing. Mr. Marino gave a fantastic report, but I'm so impressed with their technical ability. I mean, they do virtual garage sales. Any of these fundraisers that they have are so impressive. And one thing that really made me laugh, like at the end of their meeting, whoever was at that meeting goes on like this spinning wheel. And then the wheel stops and whoever's name is picked gets a gift. It's a simple thing, but I don't know how they do this. I don't know how, sounds like maybe something about it, I don't know, but I was really impressed with the things that they have going on at the higher levels of the PTA.
I think the PTA president's a former summer camp director. I think that's what it might be.
Is that Ms. Bruza?
Yeah, right?
Yeah,
Maybe.
I'm sure. Yeah, they have those websites where you can go and you plug in everyone's name and it's like Wheel of Fortune, boom, and you do a raffle. Yeah. Other old business? All right, hearing none, we're going to move on to legislative update. Ms. Jones?
There are some bills that are going to the Assembly Education Committees. There is one that allows a student enrolled in higher education institutes who has completed 30 semester hours could now serve as a substitute teacher. This is especially true for during the pandemic and would allow them to stay on longer. So that might help, down the line with what we're running through there. And there's also 2 bills that are going through that want to require courses in civic U.S. government as part of the high school graduation requirements. And the DOE is going to write the curriculum requirements. And then there's just one other thing, and it's not exactly on the legislation, but I've been given the opportunity to tune in when they have virtual meetings with the county leaders, and they're very interesting meetings, and I welcome that. What they were discussing today is some of the things that we already know about, but the rules for the NJSIA volleyball season is coming up. I didn't realize there's no jump balls in basketball this year. Again, I know, well, that for the COVID one.
I could play again because I can't jump anymore.
I'm sorry?
I could play again because I can't jump anymore.
Another question that came up, well, if you're allowing the sports, what are you doing about the performing arts, which, is a real problem. There's plenty of students that really haven't had that opportunity to do that. And so they were talking about that and what else could be done. And one other thing that was interesting was that what are you going to do when the teachers need to get or want to get a COVID shot injection, and you give them time off? Do they use that as their personal time? You have to get a substitute, but some of the districts are already experiencing that, and so that was one of the, they didn't come up with a solution to it, but they were wondering if other districts had. And just one more thing, other districts are not open nearly as much as we are. So congratulations again to you and our administration and to our teachers. They're nowhere near what we're doing.
We have a plan in place that we've shared with the principals and the teachers, and so far it's worked about how to deal with shots. Because, you know, I won't share it because it's kind of a personnel thing, right? But, you know, we have to be cognizant of people needing to get shots, but we also, we're running a business, right? We're running a school. We have to have coverage. So to date, it's worked, right? But we've tried to stay ahead of all that stuff. You know, again, not always the best solution, not always the most popular solution, but you can't just say we don't know. We have to have a plan coming forward. The one thing I'd add to the legislation, I shared with you that the DOE is not really legislation, but it kind of is because it's federal legislation. The DOE has put in a request for a waiver, right, for the assessments this spring. For a multitude of reasons, that would be the right thing to do. Hopefully, the Department of Education, the United States Department of Education, will approve the waivers as they did last year, because state assessments are a federal mandate. So we'll see where that goes. The state did push back the time window for testing in anticipation of, you know, buying some time before we start testing.
I think that was Biden said that they're not giving that waiver this year.
They're not doing it?
Yeah, like today.
Did he say that today?
Like, yeah, in the last few hours, I think I saw something about that.
Okay. We'll see. He said he's not going to grant the waiver?
Correct.
Okay.
I
Interesting.
could be wrong on
Yeah, we'll
my
see.
reading of it.
Yeah,
but-
okay. I mean, I'll wait till I see it or hear from the State Department. I mean, the bigger concern there, even less than trying to assess kids and using the scores, is how are you testing remote students, and how are you testing in districts that are still remote? So. And keep in mind, if a kid doesn't take the test, after 5%, it counts as a failure. So your test scores, you know, and they're going to say, oh, we're not even going to hold it against you. You know they'll be published, right? Oh, scores dropped. You know, so if students are remote and you can't get them to test, they count as a failure. So I hope that's fake news, not to confuse administrations, but I hope that's fake news.
All right, anything else around legislative update?
Thank you.
All right, at 9:28 p.m., we're going to open the meeting to the public for any items related to or not related to the agenda. Looking to our remote audience. Hearing no comments, we're going to close the meeting to the public at 9:28 p.m. There is a need for us to go into executive session. We have one student issue, one legal update, and negotiation update. About 20 minutes? Yep, okay, about 15, 20 minutes.
Motion?
So we need a motion to go into executive session. Mr. Mazzone, second. Mr. Bogosian, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right,